It was a moonless night. The only light which shone through the city of Canalave was by the street lamps which lined the walkways. Emmett walked these streets alone. Not even his own shadow would keep him company. The city was quiet, almost too quiet for his liking. If only he hadn't had to make this visit on his own. Reaching the corner of the street, the man finds a humble building with a blue roof. The lights were on inside. No way he could simply pass it by. Not that his job would let him. Nervously, he rubbed his ring finger before heading up to the door. With a simple knock, the man made his presence known, and in moments he was greeted by a hurried woman with a sleepless look on her face. She thanked the man profusely for coming by on such short notice. They were all peacefully in their beds when they suddenly heard a scream come from their little boy Blake's room. When she and her husband had looked to see what was the matter, they found their boy back asleep yet again. What was strange was that no matter what they did, they couldn't wake him again. Emmett nods, taking in the tale as he follows the woman to a small room of the house. Inside the room, he finds a man sitting at the bedside of a young boy with mahogany brown hair. The boy lays there motionless, apart from the rise and fall of his chest. Good. At least the boy was still breathing. Emmett rubbed his ring finger before slowly taking to the boy's bedside. He pulled out a stethoscope and placed the bell against the boy's chest. The boy's heartbeat was quickened, and yet the boy was completely comatose. He was sweating as well, quite profusely in fact. His breathing was too shallow. Normally those traits would be considered odd. Emmett asked if the boy had moved at all in his slumber prior to his arrival. The husband shook his head. The boy had barely moved ever since they first got to his room. Emmett took out a light. Prying the boy's eye open, he shined it to see how the pupil reacted. They were dilated. Emmett sighed. Even without thrashing movements, he could only deduce this to be a night terror. The fact the boy wouldn't wake up was odd, but nothing to be worried about, lest it persist beyond the night. All they had to do was just stay with him and speak to him softly. He also recommended they move anything nearby that could be deemed hazardous, should the boy begin thrashing. With those final words, Emmett took his leave. The door closed behind him on his exit. Just as he got down to the pavement, he heard a ring from his breast pocket. He took out his Rotom phone and answered it. Another case of strange nightly activity for a young boy. Yet again, these parents were worried and were asking him for a professional's opinion. Emmett groaned the moment the call ended. This was the 4th time this night. How could so many children each be dealing with the same issues? He continued his walk towards the direction of the next house, though he already had a sneaking suspicion that he'd find yet another case of night terrors on his hand. If he were any less aggravated by this night, he'd wondered whether there was a connection. Sure enough, he got to the house, only to find the same symptoms at play. Quickened heartbeat, sweating buckets, shallow breathing, dilated pupils. Another case of night terrors, even without the condition of thrashing. He gave this family the same instructions as he did every other family before he was on his way again. Finally, he could bring this night to a close. He hated working nights. It would be much nicer if his services were needed during the day. At least now, he would likely return to the hospital and be able to suffer through the nights in peace. So long as there were no other... His rotund phone rang. Like clockwork, he already knew what to expect. He picked up the phone. This time, it was an elderly couple whom he had to visit. They lived near the docks, meaning he was going to have a long trip ahead of him. He hung up the phone, rubbing his ring finger the moment after he put his phone away. He didn't like nights, but at least he was helping people. He arrived at the house a half hour later. Every step along the way made him remember the good days of having a car. Unfortunately, he could also remember the bad days as well. He had no time to complain or weigh options in his head. The sooner he helped those people in the same way he helped everyone else, the sooner he could return to the hospital. He knocked on the door, and was soon welcomed by a tired old man with thinning silver hair. When he asked about the child, he was instead met with a surprise in there not being one to examine this time. Rather, it was thanks to the child that the old man had learned of his wife's fate. When their grandson had come into their room, stating he couldn't sleep, the old man found his wife unable to awaken. What confused Emmett further about this was there being no scream of terror, unlike his previous clients of the night. Sure, she was sweating buckets and her heart was palpitating, but the very idea she was sleeping so deeply was odd. It was then that the elderly man said a name that sent a shiver down Emmett's spine. The elderly man, with such certainty, claimed this had to be the work of Darkrai. Emmett froze. He had heard that name before. His parents used to tell him stories about myths like Darkrai to scare him before he would go to sleep. But that's all it was. A story. A myth. He scoffed. The very idea that it could be the work of such a mythical being such as the pitch-black Pokemon should be considered laughable. It should be thrown out immediately. Deep sleep was uncommon in the elderly, but it could still happen. All the other symptoms could then still be signals of night terrors. Though, why were so many people having night terrors tonight? Emmett decided to give the man the same instructions he had to everyone else that night. But as he left, his mind wandered to the same questions. It couldn't just be a coincidence that all these people were having night terrors at the same time, right? But coincidence was all it could be. The idea it could be something abnormal, even mythological in nature, was preposterous. So why was he lingering on it? He checked his phone. The time read 1:30. Still had a couple hours to go. It was quite a walk to the hospital. He could afford to take his time, though, so long as he wasn't called again to do another house visit. As he walked, he came upon the Canalave library. The lights were on inside. Had the library always stayed open this late? He rarely gave the building much thought these days. It wasn't often that he needed to do some studying or research. For reasons unknown to him, Emmett felt drawn to the library. Perhaps some reading could enlighten him on more he could be doing. Maybe it would help him understand this night. Maybe these really were all just coincidences. He entered the library. The building was quiet. Very few people were active this late. The only one he could find with ease was the librarian, a humble-looking woman with her hair tied back in the bun. He approached with a question on books related to sleep, to which he was directed to the second floor. He took the stairs and found what he was looking for within the shelves of the third aisle. Not wanting to spend too much time, he skimmed the pages, up until he reached the pages over night terrors. He read these pages carefully, only to find it all to be what he already knew. Occurring only during the deepest stages of sleep, usually 1 to 4 hours after falling asleep. Symptoms included heavy breathing, screaming and thrashing, sweating, etc. Night terrors can occur after fever, sleep deprivation, emotional tension, stress, or anxiety. And just like that, he was awake. Awake? He had fallen asleep? He didn't even realize. He must have dozed off while reading. He knew he was exhausted, but didn't think it would be so much so. He closed the book and took it back to the shelf. It was best for him to get home now. At least, that's what he was originally thinking. But then he noticed another section of the library. A section simply titled as Mythology. He felt drawn to it, which was odd since he was never typically interested in myths. Maybe part of him felt the answers he sought were within those pages. He scanned through the books until he came across a book on Darkrai. He took it from the shelf. It was a little dusty, likely not bringing much attention to its pages in a while. Emmett blew the dust from the cover before cracking it open. Many of the pages didn't catch his eye. Words about how it was active on nights with a new moon, and how it would lull people to sleep. It stated how it chases people and Pokemon from its territory by causing them to experience deep, nightmarish slumbers. One page said it meant no harm, and that it did these things in self-defense. But the pages resounded more so with the sentiment that these nightmares were horrid. Far too horrible for a fate for simply invading territory. Just as he was about to get bored with the book, chalking the stories within to be nothing more, a single statement caught his eye. On a moonless night, a strange incident occurred in which everyone in a village's inhabitants suffered nightmares. The villagers attested that Darkrai appeared before them in these nightmares. Strange. A tale about every village inhabitant suffering nightmares all at once? That was almost like... No. He couldn't possibly consider there to be a correlation between these two events. It had to be mere coincidence. Emmett shut the book and returned it to the proper shelf. The moment he let go of the book, he felt a shiver run down his spine. Must have been a draft. The nights in Canalave did get rather cold. With that thought out of his mind, he took to the stairs in order to exit the library. When his feet hit the cold brick of the outside world, he knew he had to immediately return to work. The long walk would be arduous at best, so it was best to get moving on now. He took a couple steps from the doors when he noticed two small lights in the distance. Slowly, the lights grew closer until he was able to make out the visage of a taxi. From afar, the car reminded him of the kind of taxi his father used to take on business. They were typically reliable and provided good service. He could already tell that he didn't want to return to the hospital on foot after tonight, so paying little mind to the idea of a taxi running around 2 in the morning, he flagged it down. The car pulled to a rumbling stop, and without any moment of pause, a black door swung open to accept him. He climbed inside, shutting it behind him. Emmett let out a sigh of relief as he made himself comfortable in the dilapidated seating. He closed his eyes and laid his head back, telling the driver the address of the hospital. With a clunk, followed by a raspy sputter from behind, the car began to move. In any other circumstances, Emmett would find the sounds the vehicle had made as areas of concern. Not tonight, though. Tonight he felt far too drained to care. He was honestly surprised by how drained of energy he felt. Normally, the night shift took a lot out of him, but nothing like this. Or perhaps he'd never noticed. This was the first time in a while he couldn't recall having something to occupy his time, even something mundane. Moments later, he opened his eyes, only to find the car still moving. He looked out the window, only to find it too dark to see. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, only to find himself more drained upon doing so. Why was he still in the car? It shouldn't have taken that long to reach the hospital by car. So he turned to the driver. "Driver," he asked. "Where are we, driver?" But that's when he found he was no longer in the back seat of the taxi. Now he was in the front, sitting right beside the person he had assumed to be the driver. He looked to his right, and that's when he felt his stomach sink. Beside him was the most radiant image of beauty he had ever laid his eyes on. A woman so fair in complexion, and with beautiful brown eyes he wanted to get lost inside for hours. It was a face he knew all too well, but one he was only able to see in his dreams. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked, but he didn't speak. He didn't know what to say or what to do. Her very being boggled his mind. He rubbed his ring finger, only to find something there. A brilliant gold band, which would glisten in the night, had there been any light to speak of. "Oh, don't be nervous, honey," she told him. He whipped back around to see her, only to notice something about her to be different. Her hair, which was a beautiful shade of brown, was now stark white, falling across one eye and completely obscuring it. The other eye glowed a shade of blue. "It wasn't your fault this time." Sun shone through the cracked blinds of the room. Books lined the shelves from top to bottom. The morning librarian rubbed sleep from her eyes as she opened the blinds to let the sun in. It was there she noticed something, or rather, someone. A man, with his face down on top of an open book. She slid the book out from underneath his head to see what was that lulled him to sleep. A book on sleep. How ironic.